Wayne Greavette was born on January 4th, 1954 in Ontario, Canada. As a young adult, he went straight into work rather than pursuing additional education, beginning at about 18 years old with a job at the 7-Up bottling company. There, he learned to fix conveyors, install machinery, and keep bottling lines running. This line of work would connect him to a wide network of plant owners, maintenance managers, and industry contractors. Over time, he moved on to work for Surge Packaging and Machinery in Acton, Ontario, a firm that sold, installed, and serviced bottling equipment in both Canada and the United States, giving him exposure to larger clients and more complex installations. By the mid-1990s, Wayne was known as a gifted, mouthy, and cocky operator in his industry. He was someone who could make a plant run, but who also clashed with people when business went sour. He met his future wife, Diane, when they were both very young. She was about 15 and he was around 19. Diane has described her home life at the time as difficult, and has said that Wayne effectively pulled her out of a bad situation, giving her an exit into a different, more independent life. The two moved in together when Diane was around 16 and married the following year. Their time together was described as being filled with both loyalty and immense strain. They eventually had 2 children, a daughter, Danielle, and a son named Justin. By the time of Wayne's death in 1996, the couple had been together for decades and were still presenting a united front as business partners as well as spouses, even though Diane later spoke openly about control issues, infidelity, and frequent arguments. At home, Wayne was remembered by Diane and the children as a loving father who doted on his kids and embraced a relatively secluded rural lifestyle, preferring a small circle of friends to a large social scene. Diane has said that Wayne was controlling and domineering in the relationship, and that they frequently argued. These disagreements were primarily focused on his drinking and affairs, but she also stressed that she loved him and was committed to their family. Outside the home, Wayne was described as blunt and not afraid of confrontation when money or pride were on the line. This attitude earned him not only loyal friends, but also some serious enemies. Around 1996, the family made a major life and business change by buying a farm property in Moffat, a small rural community near Guelph, Ontario. The land featured a natural spring large enough to support commercial bottling. Wayne saw an opportunity to move beyond contract work into their own spring water brand. On the property, Wayne set up a workshop in the barn where he installed and tuned the bottling machinery, plumbing the spring, and building out the processing area, while Diane focused on the logistics of getting water to market, including labeling, distribution, and regulatory requirements. According to later commentary and analysis, this venture had the potential to be very lucrative if it reached scale, leading some to suggest that rivals or bitter associates might have seen it as a threat. On December 12, 1996, the family's ordinary winter routine at their farmhouse was interrupted by what appeared to be a harmless parcel they received via Canada Post. The package was addressed specifically to Wayne and had arrived in their roadside mailbox. Accounts described the package as having been decorated with various Christmas touches. Justin, Wayne's son, retrieved the mail that day, brought the parcel inside, and handed it over to his father, who had no reason to suspect any danger. When Wayne opened the outer wrapping, he found padding made from newspaper and advertising flyers, including at least one flyer traced to a local castle building center in Milton, which would later become a clue about where the packing materials had come from. Beneath the paper, there was a box containing 2 items, a flashlight and a neatly typed letter addressed to Wayne. The letter was written formally and seemed to come from a person identifying himself as William J. French, connected to a company called Acton Home Products, complete with a return address and postal code that on first glance looked legitimate. In reality, later checks showed that no such company existed and the return address was fake. The letter referenced people Wayne knew and alluded to his experience in the bottling and packaging business. Investigators later noticed a peculiar mechanical flaw in the letter. After each period, there appeared a small vertical or backslash-like mark. This was a sign of a damaged component in the typewriter's daisy wheel, which would eventually be traced to a specific Smith Corona model. The most intriguing part of the letter was the postscript, which in various retellings combined a holiday greeting with a remark about the flashlight, essentially wishing Wayne a Merry Christmas and stating that he would never need to buy another flashlight again. While Wayne read the letter, the family's attention also turned to the flashlight itself. It was a large Duracell brand floating lantern. Justin examined it first and noticed that it did not work when he tried the switch. He also thought the casing seemed unusually tight or even glued, as though it had been resealed after purchase. At this stage, the family suspected that the light was defective. After Justin's attempt, the flashlight was passed to Wayne, who was still seated in the living room with Diane and Justin nearby. When Wayne pressed the switch again, the device detonated in his hands. The explosion was devastating at close range. Investigators later described how the bomb's contents, including a load of roofing nails and other metal fragments, were blasted outward with enough force to tear through Wayne's body, shred the surrounding furniture, and punch holes through the floor, walls, and ceiling of the room. In interviews with explosives experts, the consensus has been that this type of device sits in a gray area. The design was more sophisticated than what a casual hobbyist would throw together, yet still within the capabilities of someone with access to basic tools and either prior experience or detailed instructions. The explosion ultimately killed Wayne instantly. Justin and Diane were both struck by fragments, sustaining minor cuts and puncture wounds. Justin managed to reach the phone and dial emergency services. His voice was frantic as he tried to make the dispatcher understand that an explosion had occurred and that his father had been, quote, blown up. When first responders arrived at the scene, they encountered a chaotic, grisly scene, but quickly realized that Wayne could not be saved. Medics confirmed that he was dead at the scene, the massive trauma from the explosion having caused almost instantaneous fatal injuries. Justin and Diane were treated for their wounds and shock and would later receive more thorough medical attention, but the focus at the farmhouse rapidly shifted from rescue to containment and investigation. From the beginning, investigators treated the case as a deliberate bombing and not an accident. Officers and forensic specialists collected the surviving elements of the parcel. This included the intact letter, remains of the gift box, the newspaper wrapping, and whatever fragments from the lantern they could find. Almost immediately, detectives began trying to reconstruct the package's path and the sender's actions in the days or weeks leading up to the bombing. Around the same time period that the parcel would have been mailed, 2 men were reported at the post office in Acton, where the family had previously lived, asking for Wayne's current address, approaching different people both inside and outside the building. The family had moved from Acton to the Moffett farm only months earlier, and the inquiry suggested that the sender did not have the new address readily on hand, but knew enough to trace Wayne back to his old community and then forward to his rural route. This suggested that the men were hired by another person rather than doing this due to a personal vendetta. Based on witness descriptions, the Ontario Provincial Police produced composite sketches of the 2 men and released them to the public, but neither individual has ever been definitively identified. The letter remains the most interesting piece of evidence. It referenced individuals Wayne knew and proposed a business opportunity, with details that suggested the author had real knowledge of Wayne's associates and professional life. It also contained wording that indicated resentment or grievance, though authorities have not released the full text publicly. From what has been described, the killer almost certainly knew Wayne personally. Over nearly 3 decades, investigators, journalists, and the Greavette family have returned repeatedly to the same core conclusion. Wayne's murder was not random, but grew out of his personal and business history, with several overlapping theories emerging about who might have hated him enough to send a bomb. One major thread focuses on Wayne's long-standing business dealings, particularly his work at Sir Beverage Equipment. As mentioned, Wayne was an expert technician, but was also confrontational and at times erratic in his professional behavior. In one detailed account, a former employer and partner named Ed describes how Wayne initially impressed him with his skills in maintaining and installing bottling lines, but their relationship soured over alleged theft and strange behavior. Ed claimed that he began to suspect Wayne of skimming money from jobs and noted that Wayne's behavior felt increasingly weird, which he blamed on possible substance use. Wayne denied stealing and insisted he was being treated unfairly. Tension escalated further later when Ed demanded that Wayne fire Diane from their business role, citing performance issues. This ultimatum drove an additional wedge between Ed and Wayne's family and contributed to a bitter parting of ways roughly 3 years before the murder. Because this breakup happened relatively close in time to the bombing, and because Ed openly admitted on tape that he believed Wayne had stolen from him and continued doing similar shady behavior after they split, investigators have speculated that someone from this business context might have wanted a more permanent form of revenge. Ed himself suggested that if Wayne was indeed still cheating people after leaving their company, that behavior could have motivated others to target him violently, and that his own estranged son, Ed Jr., might even have been involved, although he offered this as speculation rather than a direct accusation, and no charges followed. Police have never publicly named either man as a suspect, but the depth of animosity in those accounts has made the angry business partner scenario one of the most persistent theories. The name William J. French on the letter itself has generated another cluster of theories. The writer presents himself as someone calling from Wayne's past, saying he is starting or opening a new business called Acton Home Products and wants Wayne to quote on equipment work for 1997. He mentions 2 real people Wayne knew. These were Lisa Irvin and Joe Zodich. Both were colleagues from Sir Beverage Equipment. At the same time, basic checks revealed that no company called Acton Home Products had ever existed, and the return address based in Acton was non-existent. Technicians determined that the letter had been typed on a Smith Corona electric typewriter in all caps, using script 12 font with a daisy wheel. This created a figurative fingerprint tying the letter to a particular machine. In addition, a later linguistic analysis published online argues that the letter's wording reveals an author who is assertive, comfortable giving orders, and deeply focused on the financial aspects of his relationship with Wayne, consistent with someone who runs or manages a business and may harbor anger about money. Arguments about motive also extend to Wayne's newer business venture. By the time of the bombing, Wayne and his family were working to develop the natural spring on their property into a commercial water business. Another lane of speculation, explored but treated cautiously, involves Wayne's alleged connections to biker gangs and organized crime. It was believed that Wayne was involved in substances and hung out with a motorcycle club linked to organized crime. There was mention that Wayne could have worked as some sort of informant against the club. However, it should be mentioned that police discounted the biker gang involvement as largely media-driven and lacking solid corroboration, and the purported informant connection comes from a source unwilling to go fully on record or provide detailed evidence. As of today, Wayne's murder remains an open cold case in Ontario, with no one charged in connection with the bombing. Authorities and the family maintain hope that someone with direct knowledge of the plot will eventually come forward. Ebby Jane Steppach was an 18-year-old in Little Rock, Arkansas, attending Little Rock Central High School after transferring from a private charter school earlier in her education. Multiple accounts describe a teenager who wanted more independence than her parents felt was safe, and by the beginning of her senior year, she had moved out of the family home and was mostly staying with her grandparents and friends instead of living with her mother and stepfather. The period leading up to her disappearance is described as a time when Ebby's routine had become less stable than earlier in her life, with her family trying to keep lines of communication open even though she was living away from home. She missed school on October 21, 2015, which is often mentioned to signal that her schedule in that week was already irregular and that she may have been moving between locations and social circles. Just 2 days later, on the night of October 23, 2015, Ebby was at a party and claimed that she was assaulted. Specifically, she accused 4 men of gang raping her. She also alleged the event had been recorded on a cell phone. The following day, Saturday, October 24th, Ebby reached out to her stepfather, Michael Jernigan, with what sources describe as urgent texts about the alleged assault and her desire to go to the police. Reports stated that she had already called the police, and she asked Michael to meet her and take her to the police station so that she could file a report. However, this report would never occur. She was last seen that same day at her grandparents' house. Investigators confirm Ebby was in the area of 53rd Street and University Avenue in Little Rock between roughly 7 p.m. on Saturday, October 24th, and 3 a.m. on Sunday, October 25th. The clearest last known contact is a phone call from Ebby to her older brother Trevor on Sunday. This call occurred at approximately 5:30 p.m. and it was stated that she told Trevor that she was lost and had no idea where she was. According to Trevor, her tone was erratic and seemed almost impaired in a way. This has led to speculation that she may have been drugged, injured, or simply overwhelmed with fear. At one point, she claimed she was outside Trevor's house, but when he checked, she was not there, and she continued to insist she was in her car while being unable to clarify her actual location. This call occurred after almost an entire day without anyone actually seeing Ebby. Alarmed, her family tried to contact the police and was told to wait at least 12 hours before filing a missing person report. Then on October 27th, Ebby's silver Volkswagen Passat was discovered abandoned in Chalemont Park in West Little Rock. A security guard working in the area located the vehicle and contacted police. He waited more than 2 hours, but no officer ever showed up. The next day, seeing the car still sitting in the same spot, he called again, and police arrived roughly an hour later. That delay has become one of the most cited failures in the case because it meant the vehicle sat unsecured and exposed for an extended period when time-sensitive evidence is most recoverable. When officers did examine the car, they noted several unusual conditions. The gas tank was empty, the battery was dead, and the key was still in the ignition. Personal items were also left inside, including Ebby's phone, wallet, and contact lenses, which significantly reduces the likelihood that she voluntarily walked away. The location within the park also matters. The vehicle was not in a highly visible spot from the road, which affects both how quickly a passerby would notice it and how long it could sit before drawing attention. A car backed into a rear lot space in a public park can appear normal for days, especially if no one is actively looking for it. Because the car became the central focus of the immediate investigation, everything that happened afterwards was shaped by the assumption that the park and its surroundings were the most likely place to find either Ebby or evidence of what happened to her. When retired homicide detective Tommy Hudson later received the case file, he described it as missing steps that should have been done on the front end, including interviewing important witnesses and checking surveillance footage. He essentially had to start the investigation from the beginning. The park was searched multiple times over the years following Ebby's disappearance, including with cadaver dogs, yet they would fail to make a major discovery in the area for several years. One morning in May 2018, investigators located skeletal human remains inside an underground drainage pipe at Chalemont Park. The time of the find was reported around 10 a.m. A public works crew was called in to dig up the pipe in order to search for more evidence. It's important to clear up that the remains were buried deep inside the drainage system and were not simply lying at an opening. This detail helps explain why none of the searches involving dogs produced any sort of results. Before the remains were removed from the site, police notified Ebby's family. The remains were then carefully transported to the Arkansas State Crime Lab for formal identification. By Wednesday afternoon, less than 24 hours after the discovery, the crime lab positively identified the remains as those of 18-year-old Ebby Steppach. The family released a statement through social media expressing heartbreak mixed with a strange sense of relief. The statement said, "Yesterday, God answered the family's prayers to find Ebby. The most gut-wrenching aspect of the discovery was the proximity. The drainage pipe was just 60 feet from where her car had been located more than 2.5 years earlier. Police acknowledged that the park had been searched multiple times since Ebby went missing, including searches with cadaver dogs that lasted for days. Investigator Hudson specifically noted that in the initial investigation, cadaver dogs had searched the park for 3 days and didn't locate any kind of scent that led to Ebby. To make matters all the worse was that there were actually people making reports of a foul stench in the area near the pipe as early as November 2015. These smells were not simply sewage, but the distinct odor of decomposition. Margie Foley, the mother of Ebby's best friend, had been part of a group of local volunteers searching the park. As she and others passed by a rainwater drain, they were stopped by an overwhelming putrid smell. Multiple people searching that day also reported the same horrific odor coming from the manhole. Margie and others called the police and reported the smell, but when officers arrived, they took one look at the drain, dismissed the concern, and coldly told the searchers that dogs had already cleared the area and that the smell was probably nothing noteworthy. The police essentially rolled their eyes at the civilians who were trying to help and sent them away. The drain was not examined, and nothing came of the report. Private investigator Catherine Townsend, who was later hired by the family and went into the drainage pipe herself to document it, noted that Ebby was petite, just 5 feet 2 inches tall and about 110 pounds, and that it would still have been nearly impossible for her to lift the manhole cover, descend the ladder, and then crawl 70 feet into a pipe that narrow on her own. The most prevalent theory among family, friends, and private investigators centers on the 4 men Ebby accused of assaulting her at the party on October 23, 2015. This theory holds that one or more of these men were directly responsible for her death, either to prevent her from reporting the assault to police or in retaliation for her threats to do so. Before being able to meet up with her stepdad, Michael, to make the police report, Ebby texted at least 2 of her alleged attackers, threatening them that she was going to the police. According to Michael's later statements, he believed Ebby was trying to retrieve the video evidence herself so she would have proof when she went to the authorities, possibly because she was worried she wouldn't be believed without it. After those texts were sent, she never made it to the police station and was never heard from again after her final disoriented phone call to her brother Trevor on October 25th. Interestingly, these 4 men were never investigated, or at least not with any serious effort, according to the family. While the police did speak to the 4 men after being pressured to do so, the questioning appears to have been superficial. Multiple sources describe the interviews as surface level, essentially consisting of asking the men if they were responsible. Allegedly, officials accepted their denials without further investigation. Most damaging to the investigation's credibility is the fact that police never conducted formal searches of the men's cell phones to look for the video Ebby claimed existed. This is significant because she specifically told her stepfather that the assault had been recorded, which would constitute concrete evidence of the crime. If such a video existed and was found, it would not only corroborate Ebby's assault allegation, but also establish a clear motive for the perpetrators to want to silence her. The failure to pursue this evidence aggressively, or at all according to some accounts, has led to widespread speculation that the investigation was deliberately hampered. The identities of the 4 men have never been publicly released, which has fueled additional theories about why they may have been protected. Without names, the public cannot independently verify their backgrounds, alibis, or connections to influential families or institutions. This secrecy has contributed to suspicions that the men, or at least one of them, may have had connections that made them untouchable. This theory is compounded when looking at previous details, such as the police's refusal to treat Ebby as anything other than a runaway, despite clear signs of foul play. One particularly damning detail often cited is that the lead detective initially assigned to the case refused to investigate for the first 30 days, essentially treating it as a low-priority missing person case and actively refusing to look at security camera footage until those recordings had been erased. This pattern of behavior is difficult to explain as mere incompetence, leading many to conclude it was intentional obstruction. Perhaps the most controversial theory in the entire case is the one reportedly advanced by the police department itself. They believe that Ebby took her own life by crawling into the pipe on her own. This theory was revealed publicly in 2022 during an episode of Dr. Phil focused on Ebby's case, when her mother, Lori Jernigan, said that officials had told her they believed Ebby had placed herself in the drain. Lori's reaction to this theory was one of complete rejection and frustration. She expressed the belief that the case had been investigated as much as it would ever be by local police, and that the only path forward was for someone with knowledge to come forward voluntarily. Early in the investigation, some attention was paid to Ebby's boyfriend Eric as a potential person of interest, simply because he was one of the last people to see her before she disappeared. However, Eric has been widely ruled out as a suspect for several reasons. First, he voluntarily came forward and cooperated with investigators, including private investigator TJ Ward. He confirmed that Ebby came to see him at Chelamont Park on the night she disappeared and described her demeanor in detail, noting that she seemed upset and like she knew something bad was about to happen. His account was consistent and did not raise red flags. Lindsay Buziak was born on November 2nd, 1983 in Victoria, British Columbia, to Jeff and Evelyn. Lindsay's parents divorced when she was young, but she maintained close relationships with both of them throughout her life. Her father, Jeff, eventually relocated to Calgary, Alberta, where he built a career in real estate, while Lindsay remained rooted in Victoria, a city on the southern tip of Vancouver Island with a population of roughly 92,000 at the time. Despite the distance from her father, Lindsay stayed in regular contact with him. The two shared a very strong bond. Lindsay often confided in her father, telling him her goals, anxieties, and pretty much anything going on in her personal life. Growing up, she was consistently described by the people around her as warm, outgoing, bright, and full of energy. In 2006, Lindsay obtained her real estate license, stepping into a career path that mirrored her father's. She began selling upscale townhomes for a development group called Maverick before moving to RE Max Camison. There, she worked alongside her boyfriend Jason Zalo and his mother Shirley, one of the top producing agents in the Victoria market. By 2008, Lindsay was just 24 years old and was one of only about 20 real estate agents in the entire city under the age of 25. Despite her relative youth and inexperience, she had already generated over $3 million in sales. Lindsay's relationship with Jason was a significant part of her life in the years leading up to her tragic murder, and it would also become one of the most scrutinized aspects of the case after her death. The two met roughly 2 years before the incident, reportedly during a study group for a real estate licensing exam. At the time, Lindsay was dating someone else, but she and Jason eventually began a relationship and moved in together. Jason came from a prominent and well-connected family within the real estate community. His mother Shirley was a highly successful agent in her own right, and the family operated multiple real estate ventures. Jason himself held a real estate license and worked as a broker. The couple initially lived at a property near Shawnigan Lake that belonged to Shirley before Lindsay expressed a desire to move closer to town. They then relocated into a one-bedroom condo near Victoria's Inner Harbor at 68 Songhees Road, which was also connected to the Zalo family's property holdings. On the surface, the couple's relationship seemed to be strengthening healthily. However, the situation was not as stable as it may have appeared. By late 2007, Lindsay had begun confiding in people close to her, including her father, friends, and a woman named Vicky Mackey. Lindsay informed her circle that she was growing dissatisfied with the relationship. She told her father during a visit to Calgary in December 2007 that Jason did not seem to share the same level of ambition as her, and she told friends she was seriously contemplating ending things. According to Capital Daily's reporting, which included interviews with both Jason and members of Lindsay's family, Jason acknowledged that the couple had experienced relationship troubles, but maintained that, as far as he was aware, they were not on the verge of breaking up. Lindsay's sister Sarah offered her own perspective on the relationship's tone, describing it as positive overall and stating that Jason treated her well. That trip to Calgary would later take on additional significance in the investigation for reasons beyond the relationship discussions. Jeff later told detectives that during this visit, Lindsay confided in him that she had, quote, seen something she shouldn't have. Jeff did not elaborate on, or perhaps did not fully know, what Lindsay meant by this, and she reportedly did not go into specifics. The comment has become one of the most enduring and debated areas of the case. What is known is that shortly after Lindsay returned to Victoria from that trip, she appeared to reverse course on her plans to leave Jason. The couple reportedly went on a vacation to Whistler with Jason's family over the holiday period, and Lindsay decided to give the relationship another chance heading into the new year. In late January 2008, Lindsay received a call from an unknown number. The woman on the other end of the line told Lindsay that her husband had recently received a corporate transfer to Victoria and that the couple was urgently in need of a high-end home. According to the caller, they had a budget of approximately $1 million, and they wanted a property that was vacant, newly built, and move-in ready with at least 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a separate area for a housekeeper. The timeline was unusually tight. The woman indicated they would be arriving in Victoria within days and wanted to view properties almost immediately. Lindsay noted the details in her day planner under the shorthand label $1 million. On the surface, this was the kind of lead that any junior agent would dream about, a motivated buyer with a substantial budget looking to close fast. But several elements of the conversation unsettled Lindsay from the start. The most immediate oddity was the phone itself. Lindsay maintained a dedicated work number for client inquiries, and her personal cell was not widely distributed beyond friends, family, and close contacts. When she asked the caller how she had obtained the number, the woman claimed that one of Lindsay's previous clients had referred her. A referral was standard in real estate, and Lindsay naturally wanted to thank whoever had passed her name along, but the caller did not provide a specific name. Lindsay attempted to verify the referral independently by reaching out to the client whom she believed the woman was alluding to. However, that person denied having made any such recommendation. Then there was the accent. Lindsay described the woman's voice as sounding distinctly foreign. She characterized it as a strong Mexican or Spanish accent, though something about it did not sound right to her. She didn't explicitly call the accent fake, but she shared that it made her feel a bit uncomfortable. She privately labeled the potential clients in her day planner as the Mexicans. Despite her reservations, Lindsay did not shut the door on the opportunity. Over the following days, there were approximately 10 additional calls between this number and Lindsay's phone as they discussed the details of viewing properties. Lindsay appeared to have emailed a selection of suitable listings to the buyers on Friday, February 1st, the day before the scheduled showing. Lindsay shared her unease about the situation with multiple people. She told her father, Jeff, to which he said that she should turn down the meeting if she felt off about it. She also mentioned it to Jason, who took a more optimistic view. He did not see red flags serious enough to warrant walking away from a potential $1 million sale, and he offered to meet her at the property and wait outside in his car so she would not be alone. Lindsay also discussed the appointment with other colleagues, most of whom shared the same idea as Jason. Reassured by these arrangements, Lindsay selected a newly constructed vacant 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom house in the Gordon Head neighborhood of Saanich, listed at approximately $964,000. Police later determined from court documents that Lindsay herself provided the address to the caller during an approximately 10-minute phone conversation, contradicting a popular online theory that the suspects had specifically requested that particular property. After receiving the address, the caller appears to have used MapQuest to look up the area, which investigators interpreted as an effort to familiarize themselves with the neighborhood layout and plan escape routes. An appointment was set for 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, February 2nd, 2008. What Lindsay could not have known, and what investigators would only piece together later, was that the phone used to orchestrate all of this was a prepaid device purchased months earlier at a convenience store in Vancouver. The buyer registered it under the name Paulo Rodriguez, which authorities determined to be entirely fake. The registration also included a Vancouver street address that investigators traced back to a legitimate business, but one that had no apparent connection to the case. Police believe the address was simply chosen at random as a diversion. When investigators later sought surveillance footage from the convenience store where the phone was purchased, they discovered that the recordings had already been deleted or overwritten. Cell tower data revealed that the phone had been largely dormant since its purchase, used almost exclusively for calls connected to Lindsay. There was also a second phone. Police documents revealed that investigators had identified not just one but 2 devices connected to the case. The second was used to remotely check the voicemail of the first phone. Both phones were registered under the same name of Paulo Rodriguez. Afterward, both phones were deactivated and never used again. Saturday, February 2nd, 2008 began routinely for Lindsay. She had the late afternoon showing scheduled, and she also had plans to attend a close friend's bachelorette party that same evening, so the appointment was intended to be relatively quick before she headed out for the night. Lindsay and Jason spent the early part of the afternoon together. They went for a late lunch at Sauce, a restaurant in Victoria where Lindsay frequented. Before heading to the restaurant, Lindsay stopped by the office where she expressed some lingering concern about the showing to the receptionist and a few other realtors who were present. Two colleagues again offered to attend the showing with her, but Lindsay assured them that Jason had promised to meet her at the house by 5:30. The couple paid their bill at the restaurant at 4:24 p.m. and then went their separate ways. Lindsay headed home to change into professional attire for the showing. Jason drove to SHC Autograph X, a local auto detailing and repair shop, arriving at 4:29 p.m. He had paperwork to drop off and was also meeting up with his friend Cohen Oatman, a teammate from their recreational hockey league, as the two had plans to play a scrub hockey game later that evening. Cohen drove his own car to the repair shop and was standing outside by Jason's vehicle when Jason eventually emerged from the building. Meanwhile, Lindsay was on her way to the home. The property's owner and builder, Joe D'Souza, left the site at approximately 4:30 p.m., and other workers departed around 5 p.m. By the time Lindsay arrived, the house and the cul-de-sac would be quiet and largely empty. Lindsay arrived at the property shortly before the scheduled 5:30 p.m. appointment. The real estate lockbox on the house was accessed at 5:29, which is the timestamp investigators used to mark her arrival and entry into the home. She appears to have been setting up for the showing. There were papers spread out on the trunk of her car in the driveway when the clients arrived. At that same time, two independent witnesses in the neighborhood observed a couple walking up toward the property. They described the man as tall, approximately 6 feet, with dark brown hair and wearing a long, classy-looking brown jacket. The woman was shorter, with short blonde hair that some witnesses noted could have been a wig, and she was wearing a distinctive short dress with bold, swirling patterns in black, red, and white. Both were described as giving the impression of a polished, affluent couple. The witnesses watched as Lindsay greeted the pair in the driveway near the back of her car. They saw her shake hands with the couple in what appeared to be a cordial introduction. While this was happening, Jason and Cohen were still at the repair shop. Shortly after 5 p.m., Cohen had driven to the shop, left his own car, and climbed into Jason's Range Rover. Jason told Cohen he had gotten a call from Lindsay and explained the situation and that he needed to be with Lindsay. While driving, Jason spoke with Lindsay by phone one last time. He told her he would be there in about 10 to 15 minutes, and Lindsay's response was, "Okay, I'll see you in a bit. I got to go. The Mexicans are here." She then texted Jason the address and directions to the property. At 5:38 p.m., while still en route, Jason sent Lindsay a text message. It said, "Just a couple of minutes away." Lindsay never ended up opening this message. It was between that message being sent and 5:41 when Lindsay was attacked. At 5:41, Lindsay's BlackBerry placed an outgoing call to a contact in her phone. Investigators determined that this was almost certainly not intentional. The phone was in her pocket, and police believe that during the physical struggle of the attack, her body pressed against the device in a way that triggered an accidental dial. The attack itself was devastating. Lindsay was in the master bedroom at the top of the stairs when it began. She was stabbed more than 40 times, wounds concentrated on her throat, chest, and head. There were no defensive wounds anywhere on her body, a detail that led investigators to believe that Lindsay was attacked from behind without warning. Nothing was stolen. Lindsay's wallet, purse, and cell phone remained with her. The official cause of death was blood loss resulting from multiple stab wounds. Jason and Cohen, meanwhile, arrived at the home at approximately 5:45 p.m., just minutes after the coroner's estimated time of death. As Jason drove into the cul-de-sac, he saw the front door of the house open and noticed the couple near the entrance. According to investigators, the couple appeared to see Jason's vehicle turn into the cul-de-sac, quickly turned around, and went back inside the house. Jason parked his Range Rover on the opposite side of the road from the property, with the rear of the vehicle facing the house. Jason later explained that Lindsay had asked him to be nearby, but not to interfere with the showing. She did not want him to come inside or hover over her while she conducted business. He did not want to appear as what he described as a nosy, interfering boyfriend. So he sat in the car with Cohen and waited. After about 10 minutes, parked directly opposite the house, Jason drove a short distance down to Torquay Drive, where he still had a line of sight to the property but was not parked conspicuously in front of it. He waited there for approximately 10 more minutes. At some point, he sent Lindsay a follow-up text message asking if she was okay. Like the earlier text, this one went unanswered. Jason received no reply and Lindsay did not open the message. This was when he became suspicious. At approximately 6:05, roughly 20 to 25 minutes after the estimated time of death, Jason and Cohen walked up to the front door and found it locked. Jason knocked and rang the doorbell repeatedly, roughly 10 times, but received no response from inside. Through the stained glass panels flanking the front door, he could see a pair of shoes in the hallway belonging to Lindsay lying on the floor. Jason then called the police, telling the operator that his girlfriend was inside the house, but he could not get in and she was not responding. He and Cohen then walked around the exterior of the house, first trying the basement door on one side, which was locked, then moving to the other side of the property. There, they peered over the backyard fence and spotted an open patio door, the same door that the suspects are believed to have used to exit the house after the murder. Jason helped boost Cohen over the fence, and he dropped into the backyard, entered through the open patio doors, and raced through the house to the front door, where he unlocked it and let Jason inside. The house was silent. Jason did not search the ground floor. He went straight up the stairs to the master bedroom, where he found Lindsay lying in a pool of blood. Jason checked Lindsay's arm for a pulse, gathered her in his arms, and attempted to perform CPR. He called down to Cohen, who made a second call to police at 6:11, telling the operator that they had just entered the house, seen bloody footprints, and found Lindsay lying in a pool of blood. While he was on the phone, he could already hear sirens approaching. Police were already en route from Jason's initial call. When officers arrived, Jason and Cohen were visible through the upstairs bedroom window, waving their arms to signal the location. Police entered the home, went directly to the master bedroom, and confirmed what Jason had already discovered. Lindsay could not be revived. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Both men were taken to the Saanich police station in separate vehicles. Jason was initially arrested but was released the following morning after questioning. Detectives immediately began processing the crime scene and working outward. They examined Lindsay's phone records and confirmed that the prospective client had called her personal cell number rather than her professional line, which further supported the theory that the caller had prior knowledge of Lindsay's life. Staff Sergeant Chris Horsley later confirmed publicly that the pocket dial at 5:41 resulted in a muffled voicemail message left on the phone of a friend Lindsay was not in regular contact with. The coroner's report placed the time of death at approximately 5:40, consistent with the phone evidence. Inside the house, a trail of bloody footprints was found on the staircase leading down from the master bedroom, suggesting the killer or killers had walked through Lindsay's blood and descended the stairs before exiting the property. They planned to use the front door until Jason and Cohen arrived. This appears to have caused the suspects to abandon their planned exit route. Instead, they retreated through the house and left via the open rear patio doors, likely escaping through a gap in the backyard fence and onto Torquay Drive, where they could have reached a vehicle or simply walked away from the quiet residential street unnoticed. No murder weapon was recovered at the scene or in the surrounding area. Investigators scoured the property for fingerprints, hair, fiber, and DNA, but the results were described as extremely limited. From early in the investigation, public attention gravitated toward Jason and his family, and police devoted significant resources to examining them. Jason's movements on the day of the murder were corroborated through multiple independent sources, and he was ultimately cleared as a suspect. In 2010, the Zalo family voluntarily met with detectives over a period of several days. Officials wanted to investigate further into the family and not just examine Jason alone. After their questioning, they announced that the family satisfied all of their investigative inquiries. This announcement was met with skepticism by Jeff Buziak and segments of the public who had already formed suspicions about the family. Despite the clearance, public suspicion has never fully faded. The tensions eventually escalated into legal action. In May 2022, Shirley Zalo filed a defamation lawsuit against Jeff, alleging that his online posts implied she had planned, participated in, or committed the murder. Jeff responded by hiring the Zonta Research Group, a private investigation firm, to examine the case independently and support his legal defense. One of the most persistent alternative theories links Lindsay's murder to a massive substance trafficking operation dismantled in Calgary around the same time. In late 2007 and early 2008, a joint Calgary Police Service and RCMP investigation known as Operation High Noon was targeting a cocaine ring that used hidden vehicle compartments to transport substances between British Columbia and Alberta. On January 22, 2008, just 11 days before Lindsay's murder, police arrested Erickson Del Alcazar and Graham Taylor, seizing 25 kilograms of cocaine and $217,000 in cash. A further 42 kilograms were found in a safe seized during that same operation 6 days later. Erickson was denied bail on February 1st, 2008, one day before Lindsay was killed. The connection to Lindsay was indirect but notable enough to attract investigative attention. Erickson was described as a high school friend of Lindsay's. During her December 2007 trip to Calgary to visit her father, phone records showed Lindsay had been in contact with a friend of her ex-boyfriend who was linked to Erickson's circle. The theory holds that Lindsay may have inadvertently witnessed or learned something about the drug operation during that Calgary trip, and that her murder was retribution from the cartel, possibly connected to her cryptic remark to her father about having, quote, seen something she shouldn't have. Investigators examined this angle, but ultimately moved away from it. Sergeant Horsley told reporters that police had scoured Lindsay's financial records, online chats, even those that she deleted, and have found nothing to indicate any criminal or substance dealings that might lead to a motive in the slaying. He also stated that Lindsay was not a police informant. However, Horsley did offer a nuanced observation. Because Lindsay's background was so clean, and because the killers operated at a level of sophistication consistent with professional hits, investigators believed she may have been slain based on misinformation. In other words, Lindsay was clearly the intended target, but the reason someone wanted her dead may have been based on something that was not actually true. This comment has been widely cited, but never elaborated upon by the police. In August 2017, almost 9 years after Lindsay's death, an interesting comment surfaced on an online forum associated with the case that said, "I killed Lindsay and stupid cops will never prove it." Both CBC and local reporting treated this cautiously. The post's authenticity could not be verified publicly, and police would not validate it, stating only that the investigation remained open and tips were reviewed. Whether it was a genuine confession, a tasteless troll, or something else entirely remains unknown. In November 2025, Lindsay's mother Evelyn claimed that the active investigation had effectively ended and that detectives were being reassigned. Police pushed back firmly, stating the investigation remains active and ongoing and that personnel reassignments are standard practice in policing that do not change the priority of a case. As of January 2026, police confirmed that the investigation is still open with detectives working the file full-time. Jeff held the 18th annual Memorial Walk on February 2nd, 2026, and expressed cautious optimism about two newly assigned investigators. He told reporters, "It's the first time I probably feel that these are the right guys on the job. They just need to be able to have the full support of the police department." Jeff, who recently underwent triple bypass heart surgery, has made clear he will not stop advocating for answers regardless of his health. Angela Brooks was born on June 22, 1991, and grew up in Warrenville, South Carolina, a small, quiet community located just outside of Aiken. Angela came from a single-parent household and was raised by her mother, Marilyn, alongside her two siblings, Darylyn and Stephen. Though public information about Angela's early life is limited, those who knew her described her as someone who brought joy and positivity to her family. Angela was 19 years old in the fall of 2010, navigating her shift into adulthood. The second individual involved in this entry was named Nancy Cushman, who was born on December 27, 1992, making her a little more than a year younger than Angela. Nancy grew up in Beach Island, South Carolina, another small community in Aiken County. By 2010, Nancy had relocated from Beach Island to Warrenville, the same town where Angela lived, and the proximity helped cement a friendship between the two that those around them described as inseparable. Additionally, Nancy was the mother of a young daughter at just 17 years old. She was known for her outgoing personality within her circle of friends and family. One of the most significant details in the background of this case is Nancy's romantic involvement with a man named Travis Lorenzo Berrien. Berrien was 26 years old in November 2010, 9 years older than the 17-year-old Nancy. He lived in the Augusta area and had an extensive criminal history that predated his connection to Nancy. Most notably, in 2008, he had been convicted on multiple charges, including aggravated assault, second-degree criminal damage to property, and criminal use of an article with an altered identification mark, resulting in a sentence of 5 years in prison and 6 years of probation. Despite the severity of that sentence, Berrien was released from custody roughly a year later and returned to the streets of Augusta, where he eventually crossed paths with Nancy Cushman. Captain Scott Peebles would later publicly describe the relationship between Berrien and Nancy as increasingly volatile. The concerning ages at play alone raised serious concerns about the power dynamics. Berrien would also go on to become a person of interest in this entry due to this relationship. On the evening of Wednesday, November 24th, 2010, the night before Thanksgiving, Angela and Nancy were out in the Augusta area. The last confirmed sighting of the two young women was at approximately 12:30 a.m. on Thursday, November 25th. They were spotted about a mile east of the location where their bodies would later be found along East Boundary Street. Critically, at the time of this sighting, Angela and Nancy were reportedly in the company of an unidentified black male whom the girls' friends and family did not recognize. Nancy was driving her white Cadillac Escalade that night, as she typically did when the two went out together. This vehicle was later discovered abandoned roughly a mile and a half from the crime scene. At approximately 2:30 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, roughly 2 hours after the girls were last seen alive, a woman named Betty Chisholm was walking near the intersection of Laney Walker Boulevard and Twig Street when something in the semi-wooded area alongside the road caught her attention. The area was littered with debris, and at first glance it was not immediately clear what she was looking at. Unsettled by what she had seen, Betty went to retrieve her cousin and the two returned to the spot together. That is when they realized they were looking at not one but two bodies, both lying face down with their hands positioned over their heads. Betty then called the police immediately. When officers arrived at the scene, they confirmed the worst. Two young women lay dead in the sparse tree cover next to abandoned railroad tracks, directly across the street from a mini-mart. Both had been shot in the back of the head at close range in what would be described as an execution-style killing. The positioning of the bodies, face down, hands over their heads, suggested that the victims were forced into this posture before being shot. Investigators quickly identified the victims as Angela Brooks and Nancy Cushman based on identification found at the scene. Both women lived just a few miles north but had deep ties to the Augusta area through friends, extended family, and their social lives. By the evening of November 25th, the Richmond County Sheriff's Office had already begun releasing information to the media. Police announced that they were searching for a person of interest. This man was Travis Berrien. A reward was also announced for information leading to an arrest. 4 days after the murders, on Monday, November 29th, the Sheriff's Office held a press conference that dramatically escalated the case. Captain Scott Peebles, the department's primary spokesperson on the investigation, took the podium and revealed a series of new details that reshaped how the community understood the killings. First, he publicly elevated Berrien from person of interest to suspect. He disclosed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Nancy, describing it as an unstable on-again, off-again fling. Scott went further, stating that there had been significant issues between Berrien and Nancy in the period leading up to Thanksgiving morning, though he declined to elaborate on the nature of those issues, citing the ongoing investigation. Second, Scott revealed that multiple witnesses had placed Berrien with Angela and Nancy earlier on the night of November 24th, and that the two girls had apparently made a deliberate effort to visit Berrien in the hours before they were killed. The reason for that visit was never publicly disclosed, but the implication was clear. A friend of the girls named Sean Johnson had previously told local news stations that he could see a third person sitting in the backseat of Nancy's Escalade that night, but did not recognize them. Furthermore, investigators revealed that they believed at least 2 men were responsible for the killings. Perhaps the most intriguing piece of evidence presented during the November 29th press conference was a short clip of security camera footage obtained from a convenience store on Wrightsboro Road, approximately 5 miles from the eventual crime scene. The footage, captured at around 12:20 a.m. on November 25th, showed Nancy's Cadillac pulling into the store's parking lot. 2 African-American men exited the SUV and walked into the convenience store. At the time of the press conference, police indicated that one of the men in the footage might be Travis Berrien, but that identification turned out to be incorrect. Within hours of releasing the video to the public, investigators were able to identify both men through tips and their own follow-up work. Both individuals were brought in for questioning on November 29th and were subsequently cleared of any involvement in the murders. Neither man was believed to have participated in or had knowledge of the killings, and the sheriff's office declined to publicly release their names. Crucially, however, investigators confirmed that neither of the 2 men in the footage was Berrien. This meant that Berrien's whereabouts during the window of the crimes remained unaccounted for by the surveillance evidence, and he remained the primary suspect. This also raised an interesting question. If the 2 other men were seen driving Nancy's vehicle and neither was Berrien and both were cleared of involvement, then what was the nature of their connection to the vehicle that night? This question was left unresolved. After the flurry of activity in the first week following the murders, the case stalled. There were no new arrests, no additional press conferences revealing breakthroughs, and no public updates of substance for months, which turned into years. At some point during this period, law enforcement located Travis Berrien and brought him in for an interview. However, he was released shortly after. No public statement was issued explaining the circumstances of his detention or what he said during questioning. Berrien was never publicly cleared of involvement in the murders. He simply walked out, and the investigation continued to grind forward without resolution. The DNA extracted from the cap found in the car was entered into the DNA index system and other law enforcement databases, but it did not produce a match. The palm print suffered the same fate. Without a database hit, and apparently without enough testimonial or circumstantial evidence to build a prosecutable case, the double homicide of Angela and Nancy gradually went cold. In 2015, 5 years after the murders, Sergeant Brandon Beckman, one of the primary investigators on the case, spoke to Augusta Chronicle reporter Bianca Johnson about the status of the investigation. Beckman noted that the case was unusual because of the victim's profile, stating that when females are involved in homicides, it is typically domestic in nature, but that did not appear to be the situation here. He acknowledged that multiple leads had been pursued over the years, but that none had produced anything solid. In 2012, roughly 2 years after the incident, Travis Berrien surfaced again, this time on charges of hindering the apprehension of a felon. He and 2 associates had allegedly helped shelter 2 men who were wanted for the death of a man named Charlie Jones III in Augusta. Once again, Berrien managed to avoid serious long-term consequences. Fast forward about another year, in the summer of 2013, Berrien's life would actually come to an end. That morning, a 51-year-old pastor named Michael Anthony Riley was shot and killed inside his home on Greenbrier Trail. Riley was the pastor of New Birth Non-Denominational Church on Woodrow Avenue in Statesboro, and his murder was initially characterized as a mysterious home invasion. The investigation quickly revealed something far more sinister. It was a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated from inside a Georgia prison. Riley's wife, Antoinette, wanted out of her marriage and had conspired with her daughter, Katrina Ledford, and Ledford's boyfriend, Terrell Momon, to have Riley killed. Momon was an inmate at Dooley State Prison where he had been incarcerated since 1996 on charges including kidnapping, armed robbery, aggravated assault, and aggravated sodomy. Using a contraband cell phone smuggled into his cell, he coordinated the hit from behind bars, recruiting outside associates to carry out the actual shooting. 2 men from the Augusta area were identified as the alleged triggermen. Terrence Griswold, a 28-year-old who described himself as a music producer, and Travis Berrien. Cell phone records played a central role in linking both men to the crime, with data showing a phone traveling from Augusta to Statesboro and back at the exact time of Riley's murder. Text messages recovered from the phones of the conspirators revealed extensive planning and coordination in the days and minutes before Riley was shot in the left eye as he slept in his own home. A Bullitt County grand jury indicted Momon, Griswold, Ledford, and Antoinette for malice murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Ledford and Antoinette both pleaded guilty to murder charges. When Momon and Griswold were tried together in November 2014, the jury convicted Momon of malice murder but acquitted Griswold on all counts. Griswold's defense rested on a critical claim. He testified that he had lent his car and the cell phone that was charging inside it to Travis Berrien on the day of the murder, and that it was Berrien, not Griswold, who had driven to Statesboro and participated in the killing. The jury found this testimony credible enough to acquit Griswold, which meant that his acquittal rested, at least in part, on the assumed guilt of a dead man who could never stand trial to contest it. Travis Berrien never faced a jury for the murder of Michael Riley because of what happened on the afternoon of July 23, 2013. By that date, investigators in Statesboro had unraveled the conspiracy behind Riley's murder and obtained arrest warrants for the suspects, including Berrien. Richmond County authorities were in communication with Statesboro police, and the decision was made to use Berrien's existing probation obligations as a means of getting him into a controlled environment where he could be taken into custody. He was still on probation stemming from his 2008 aggravated assault conviction, and he was called into the Augusta probation office on Green Street for what was presented as a routine check-in. Berrien arrived at the probation office just after 4 p.m. on that Tuesday afternoon. When probation officers moved to arrest him on the outstanding murder warrant, Berrien did not comply. Instead, he pulled a concealed firearm, which, as a convicted felon, he was prohibited from possessing, and a violent struggle erupted. In the chaotic seconds that followed, 2 shots were fired. Probation officer Latasha Warren, a 7-year veteran of the department, was struck in the abdomen. Berrien was also hit, suffering a wound that proved far more severe. Backup officers rushed in and attempted to stabilize both wounded individuals. Warren and Berrien were transported to the nearby Georgia Regents Medical Center, where Officer Warren was quickly stabilized and was expected to make a full recovery. As for Berrien, he was pronounced dead at 4:53 p.m., less than an hour after the confrontation began. The ramifications of Berrien's death for the Angela Brooks and Nancy Cushman investigation were profound and devastating for the victims' families. He remained the primary person of interest throughout the investigation. Whatever knowledge he potentially possessed about the murders of the 2 women died with him on the floor of that probation office. The parallels between the 2 murder cases connected to Berrien are difficult to ignore. In the Brooks-Cushman double homicide, investigators believed at least 2 men had led the victims into a wooded area and executed them. In the Riley murder, again, 2 men were alleged to have coordinated a hit. In both cases, the killings were deliberate, premeditated, and suggested the perpetrators had experience with such violence. And in both cases, Travis Berrien, a convicted felon with a documented history of firearms violence stretching back more than a decade, was at the center.